Okay guys, follow up to my last video, the cottage question. The first comment on my most recent video, the poster essentially asked three questions, which is number one, why delete cottage to turn it into a villa? So I just want to clarify that I do not do that. I agree that would be wasteful if I was doing that, but I don't do that. So in the beginning, everything is tile houses, right? I upgrade most of them to cottage, and then the last 5 or 6 tile houses that I have, I just upgrade straight to villa. So the villas that I do have in my QI city were never cottages before that. It's just tile house straight to villa. But for the most part, I do have cottages in my city. So just to clarify that. Question number 2 is, why do you have so many expansions? Which, let's come back to that because it kind of ties in to question number 3, which is, don't you realize that villa is higher output than cottage? But these two questions are kind of interconnected. Yes, I do realize that a villa is higher coin production as well as action production than a cottage, but I'm not comparing a single cottage. I'm not comparing 1 to 1. I'm not comparing a single cottage to a single villa. I'm comparing one villa to 2 cottages, where the coin production as well as action production off of 2 cottages is actually equal to villa. And the difference here is the amount of space that it takes up, obviously, which answers the second question. Why do I have so many expansions? Well, because I have essentially twice the footprint in housing to get the production value out of a single villa, essentially. Which sounds like a wasted step, but let's break down the math, and hopefully this kind of clears up some of those questions, because I've had teammates ask me similar questions, like, you know, it's a waste of effort essentially to have a ton of cheap buildings, buy a bunch of expansions, and then just delete everything anyways. It's wasted effort. It's actually really not, though. So let's break down some of the math here. I've made 2 little mock-ups here, so let's look at these real quick. This first example would represent what you start with. 1, 2, 3 wide by 4 tall in terms of 4x4 grids. That's what you'd start with. I assume that most people add at least a few expansions, but I don't know how many you actually add. I assume that you're going to add some space to this, though. Let's look at the example next to it, which is 5x4. So this would be an additional 8 expansions. I usually add 10 expansions to my QI city, but let's use this as the example for now. This would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 extra expansions over the original 3x4. Using the escutcheons just so you guys can kind of visually see what that grid space would look like. So now let's start filling it up, okay? I'm going to leave one just in case we need to create an expansion somewhere, just for funsies. Let's start filling this up, though. Like I said, I assume that you're going to add some expansions, but if you're conservative on the expansion side, your city grid is not going to be a whole lot bigger than this, you know? This starts, I'm going to use sailmakers, by the way, for to represent villas, because I only have 6 of them, so it's kind of the creme de la creme. I've got a bunch of Neo Kings, so we're going to use those to represent cottages, because they're cheap and readily available, right? Obviously we need roads. We don't need 2 roads here, but we do need at least 1 road. We can stuff a attack thing in there. You can see pretty much right away that this space is getting pretty claustrophobic. We need a military building. The space is already getting pretty claustrophobic, just with a couple pieces of hardware in it, right? Versus over here, we're going to end up with a farm, right? We know that we're going to need some military stuff. I'll end up with a couple villas in there, but for the most part, it's just, and I'm intentionally leaving, like, I'm not trying to pack this into an organized system. There's a lot of gaps in here, and I'm doing that intentionally, just so that you can see, even with a chaotic design, the amount of space that you have to play with which is common sense, right? Like if I added 8 extra expansions, obviously I have more space. That's common sense. But just so you can see visually what that space amounts to once you compare it to the size of your town hall, right? So strategy number one is to go from tile house straight to villa. So upgraded housing, upgraded supplies. Skip the tailor step. I agree with that. I don't build tailors. I don't recommend anyone build them. The tailor is a wasted middle step. But cottages, I actually do. I think you get a pretty good return on investment with cottage. So philosophy number one is, amphitheater straight to arch. We got farms, we got villas. We're going to start planning some attack right away. And so it's a smaller city grid, right? Smaller space, but everything in it is decked out, right? That's philosophy number one. Philosophy number two is I'll have a couple farms throughout the season, a lot of butchers, a lot of tile houses, and then start upgrading the butchers into farms and the tile houses into cottages. But I don't usually plant villa until, I don't know, Monday or Tuesday usually, but I don't rush them. So I don't actually collect a benefit out of villas until usually the Wednesday, like the first week into it essentially is when I'll get the first collection benefit out of a villa, typically speaking. So the side comment from the person who posted on my last video was, don't you realize it's kind of like a wasted benefit if you wait too long to plant the villa? But the assumption behind that question is that I'm planting the villa to get coins, which is actually not the case, or even actions for that matter, which is why I don't rush them. I'm planting the villa for the end game, and I'll show you what my QI city looks like now. But when I do plant these villa, by the time I plant them, I have like 1.5 million in coin, so I really don't even need the coin production. And I have so many cottages at that point that, like, during the day I can use up my actions, but when I go to sleep, unless I set an alarm 4 hours into sleeping, my action bar is going to get filled up, so every morning I wake up with a full action bar. So in that sense, I really don't even need the actions either. During the day, sure, I could use a couple extra 1,000 actions, I guess, but in the grand scheme of things, I have a full action bar every morning when I wake up. So don't need the actions, don't really need the coin per se. And I'll show you the in-game strategy that I'm talking about. But the reason I plant villas that late in the season, they're expensive, first of all, and I don't rush them. So if I plant them early in the season and don't rush them, when I need a lot of coin for collections, like if I'm trying to build farms or anything like that, so I need the coin from the collection, but don't rush the villa that I planted in the previous round, my collections are going to be a lot smaller, right? So I don't plant villa until my collections are big enough where I can't even spend all of it anyways, and then I plant villa. But like I said, I'm not deleting cottages to plant a villa. These 4 villa here would come from tile houses in this layout. So effectively what we're comparing here is a villa plus some attack ability, right, on a small grid. So we have the housing we need plus the attack ability that we're eventually going to want, right? This is build strategy option number 1, and the total cost is 125 coin over 200,000 in supplies. That's build strategy number 1, right? Build strategy number 2, though, is to plant cheaper housing, right? Way cheaper than a villa, but instead of using this space for decorations early on, I don't need decorations on difficulty level 2, Every city's different, so if you guys are finding yourself needing some attack boost by level 5, plan accordingly. So every city is different in that sense, but I definitely don't start my city design with any kind of decorations. Not for me, it's not until difficulty level 8 usually is when I'll plant a couple of them just to start filling up some empty space, and then level 9 and 10 I'll start transitioning into basically almost all decorations, but I just don't plant them early on. So the comparison here is not one villa versus one cottage. The comparison here is one villa versus 2 cottages, right? And this pair is half the cost of a single villa, so I can use the resources that I'm saving to add space to the city and build a 3rd cottage. Total cost of build strategy number 2 is 19,000 coin over 75 supplies. 125 in coin over 200. So I'm saving roughly 100,000 of both resources with this scenario. And if I don't start planning decorations for attackability until Wednesday or Thursday, usually like difficulty 8 is when I'll start planning a couple of them. So that's almost a full week. That's 14 collections of this pair versus this pair, where this is generating, depends on your coin boost, but we'll just call it 40k times 14 collections. And I'm generating 60k times 14 off this bottom group. So not only is this bottom group cheaper to build originally, so 19k over 75k includes all 3 of those, and it's still cheaper to build than just a single villa for that matter. Not to mention the cost of the decorations, but 3 cottages is still cheaper than the cost of a villa. So it's cheaper to build, but it's actually producing an extra 20,000 coin per collection, times 14 collections hypothetically is 280,000 additional coin generated. Let's round up, because I usually don't start making this transition until pretty late in the season, Thursday, Friday, whatever, difficulty 9 or 10 like I said. So for 14, 15 collections, I'm getting an extra chunk of coin every single collection, to where it's cheaper to build, first of all, by 100,000 of each, but by the time that it runs its course, I've also generated another 300,000 in profit from that combination. So when I do reach a point where, okay, I'm starting to struggle on the map, I need some attack ability, it costs me nothing to delete a cottage. I mean, it costs me a couple resources, but in the grand scheme of things, this does not hurt my feelings to delete a cottage at that point, because for the last 7 days, it's just been making profit that I can't even spend, you know? And at this point, the decorations are essentially paid for by the extra profit that I've been making from this pair. And remember, the action production as well as coin production is identical here. We're not comparing a single villa versus a single cottage. We're comparing a single villa versus a pair of cottages. So by the time I delete that 3rd cottage, like, I'm not losing coin output at this point. I'm actually breaking even with a villa, because I have been making extra up until this point. So now I'm just even, but I also have more space because the original investment was cheaper, right? So I was able to take that 100,000 in coin and 100,000 in supplies that I would have spent on a villa, and I took those resources to buy extra space, right? Extra space right here. And then once I actually do need the attack ability, delete a cottage. And once I need a little bit more attack ability, I can actually delete a 2nd cottage and plug some more attack space in here, and still have some coin and action benefit, right, from my remaining cheap house. I still get some coin and action benefit from that. Whereas if I delete a villa to match the attack ability from build strategy number 2, if I'm rocking build strategy number 1 and delete my villa, I have no more coin or action production. Does that make sense so far? So I think that kind of covers it here for now. I might circle back. Let's jump over into QI though. I'll show you guys where I'm at currently. Let's check out the fighting real quick. Pretty doable. Couple injuries. Every now and then, depending on the pair, I'll lose an archer, or at least depending on the enemy. But for the most part, pretty comfortable. Getting some shards, which is nice. Again, the part of the key, if you guys want to rush your villas, then by all means, that's a better building option. But if you're not inclined to rush your villas, which depends on your budget, if you want to spend a ton of money on QI, plant all the villas that you can possibly fit in your city and just tear it up. But depending on your budget, I don't like to spend a whole lot of money on QI. I'll spend money on main events to get main city hardware that boosts QI, but inside of QI itself, I try not to spend a whole lot of money. So I'm not inclined to rush villas, and because I'm not going to rush them, I want the action benefit of a villa, but I'm not inclined to rush it, so I want that action benefit as soon as possible, which for me is a pair of cottages. It's the same action production, remember? So instead of planning and rushing a villa, I don't want to spend the shards on it. I just want to generate shards from the map, and then at the end of the championship, I'll dump my shards on actions usually. But throughout the seasons, I don't want to spend my shards on that. So let's jump over to the settlement real quick. So looking back at the most recent video that I posted was kind of the plateau, I guess, if you will. So you start your settlement, and then you got to build up your production. We're generating troops, we're planting farms, we're getting arches, stuff like that. But then eventually hit a plateau where I've built all 10 expansions, right? I get all 10 expansions. I've planted all the farms that I am going to plant for the rest of the season. I've planted a handful of villa, and if you remember the most recent video, I had 5 villa. That hasn't changed. I still have the same 5. So I haven't deleted any cottages to upgrade into an additional villa. I have the same 5 villas, and then the rest is just cottages. So eventually I hit this plateau where there's nothing left to build, right? I have all the farms I want, I have all the housing that I want, and how I want it configured. But I don't need the attack ability yet, and I'm not killing troops yet. So it's usually about 3 days for me. It's like Sunday through like Wednesday night, Thursday morning, so 3 or 4 days usually, where my happiness is euphoric. I don't really have empty space, but the empty space I do have, I don't have decorations in it, just because I don't want to deplete the happiness. So it's usually like a surplus of 50 happiness or something. Not enough to sustain a decoration. So I just leave the empty space where it is, right? And then for 3 or 4 days, just collect the entire city as it is. You can see that I've started spending some of my stockpile, but still have plenty of resources left, just from stockpiling for 3 or 4 days where I didn't need the attack ability. There's no reason to plant decorations if my troops aren't dying. And then difficulty 8 or 9, I start transitioning into something like this, where I'll delete a farm and a couple cottages. So at one point I had 7 farms, 5 villa, and 22 cottage. You can see that I'm down to 2 farms now, -5, and then I'm down to 12 cottages now, so -10 on the cottage. But the villa is the same 5 that I had once I hit this plateau point. It's the same 5 villa. And this is where the endgame strategy with villa comes in. Early on, I want more actions and I want them faster, so I'm going to come back to that idea. But early on, I plant a pair of cottage versus 1 villa and use the resources that I'm getting to add extra space, right? Once I hit this point where I have all the resources I need, I can't even use my collections because I don't need to print troops, I don't need to plant decorations, there's literally nothing to spend my resources on. So at that point, I'll delete my last few tile houses and replace with a villa, but not to get the coin or action production out of it on Wednesday, but to get that benefit from it now on Saturday. So that as I start deleting these cottages in order to gain space for decorations, as I start deleting cottages, the villas that I planted on Wednesday that I didn't even need on Wednesday are now a more compact producer of the coin and actions that I still want to be generating into the end game. Does that make sense? So the idea that waiting too late in the season to plant Villa, like I'm not going to get the benefit out of Villa if I wait until Wednesday to plant them, the assumption there is that I need the coin or the actions off of a Villa on Wednesday, but that's not the case. I'm planting Villas on Wednesday so that I get the benefit out of them on Saturday, essentially. And if I get some extra coin and actions out of it on Friday, that's cool. But the ultimate strategy behind it is to plant those villas for the last 2 days, and not like the only thing I want out of Villa at this point is honestly just the extra actions per hour. And as I start deleting Cottage, the few Villa that I have remaining will continue giving me those actions, but just on a more compact footprint. So at this point, once you every city's different, like I said, but once I hit this point where, okay, I'm starting to lose a few troops on the map now I can start deleting some of these cottages, these extra cottages that I planted just to fill up space and generate a surplus of resources. Now I'm going to start deleting those in favor of the attack that I need to keep going on the map. So early on, I want actions. Later on, I want attack, right? And I still want actions right now, but if I have to sacrifice a couple actions to actually make them viable, that's kind of a necessity there, you know what I mean? So we're going to break down the math here real quick on Cottage versus Villa in this in my current layout right now. Let's bounce back over to the main city though real quick and compare that to build strategy 1 and 2 that we talked about. Oops. So remember, build strategy 1 kind of preemptively has these decorations in it. Like, I know that I'm going to need them eventually, so I might as well incorporate it into my city design itself. Build strategy number 2 omits the decorations until Thursday or Friday, until I actually legitimately start needing them, right? And if I lose one ballista per 100,000 actions, I'm not going to plant decorations. But if I start losing 3 ballista per fight, it's like, okay, probably stop the presses, let's delete a cottage, plant some decorations, come back in an hour, and see if my troops are surviving now. You know, and at that point, it doesn't matter when I delete the cottage. Like, I don't need to do it at collection time. I've already gotten the benefit out of this surplus cottage. I've been getting this benefit for an extra 4 days. By the time I pull that trigger, it's like, well, I just burned up 10 ballista. So there's 40,000 worth of resources. It's probably more cost effective to start building some decorations at this point and lose the collection potential out of that. But even in this situation, these 2 cottages are still giving me the same actions as well as coin as the single villa. I've just been getting the benefit of this third one for an extra couple days. Make sense so far? Let's get back into QI. Okay, so we're back in the QI settlement now. Currently have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 cottages. Same 5 villa, like I said. So the 12 cottages, essentially in terms of coin and action benefit, those 12 cottages are equivalent to 6 villas in terms of the production value. The difference is obviously space, but if you're building 10 expansions, the space is not really the issue. Like, obviously I still have plenty of space for decorations as well as the happiness to sustain those decorations. I planted 5 arches this morning collection, so my happiness will be euphoric again by the time I actually collect tonight, but just to counteract the decorations that I added. Still have plenty of resources, like I said. In my recent video that I did, another recent video, I talked about building extra farms, kind of up to that plateau point that we talked about. Have like 7 or 8 farms, which is totally overkill. But I have nothing to spend the resources on, and I don't need attack at that point in the season. So instead of buying attack that I don't need, that's going to chew up my happiness, whatever, buy another expansion, plant another farm in it, and just continue collecting these resources. So by the time I start deleting farms, I only have 2 farms left, so I'm only getting 160 supplies out of each collection. But I have so much stockpiled that it doesn't matter. I could delete everything that I have currently and still uh, run out of space to fill up with decorations before I run out of resources. You know what I mean? So, essentially, back to this. 12 cottage is equivalent to 6 villas in terms of production value. At one point, I had 22 cottages. I've started deleting them just for attackability. And honestly, I could just delete farms instead of cottages and keep the action benefit of cottages, but I do try to keep this somewhat balanced into the end game. It doesn't have to be perfectly balanced because I'm not going to be able to spend all those resources anyways, but I do want somewhat of a balance as I delete stuff. So at this point, I have effectively 11 villas, right? Currently. I have the actual 5 villas, and then I have, that's 1, this would be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 5 actual villas plus 6 villa combinations, essentially. So if you are a fan of the build strategy number 1, which is just to build villas only, 11 villas is still a pretty healthy amount of housing, right? And I'm currently getting the action benefit of that. But throughout the season, having a surplus of tile houses allowed me to create a lot of extra space. So I've seen plenty of people's QI builds, and 11 villas is like probably even overkill, actually. But I have that currently, as well as all of the decorations that are lacking from that strategy on a smaller grid, right? But for a lot of the season, I actually had essentially 16 villas because I had 22 cottages, so 11 villa plus the 5 villa that I actually have. So that's what I want to do the math on. So 16 villa, but I'm just gonna ignore the 5 of these, since that's going to be the same variable in either scenario. So effectively I had 16 villa, but we're going to do the math on 11 of them, which is 22 cottages or 11 villa. And then in this scenario, I would have 16 villa. Essentially, it's the 11 that I would have built plus the 5 that I actually did build. And in this scenario, I would have 16 cottages, which is the 11 that I built, plus the 5 that I actually have, right? So the 5 that are currently planted, we're just going to eliminate from the math to keep it simple. So in terms of cost, cottage method was 137,500 in coin, over 550 in supplies. And if I actually had planted 11 villa instead of the 22 cottages, would have been, what is that, 275 in coin, over 1.1 million in supplies. So there's a couple different factors here. I'll come back to that. Action benefit, though, is the main thing here. 11 villa, assuming you don't rush them, you're gonna miss the coin collection on the upcoming collection. First of all, which, like I said, I don't really care about that necessarily. It's the action benefit that I'm mostly interested in. So these 22 cottages are equivalent to 11 villa in terms of actions, right? But I'm getting those actions within an hour of planting them. So 11 villas times 9 extra hours worth of actions times 200 per action, right? It's roughly 20k. It's like 19 something and change, but we'll call it 20k. So just the act of planning cottage instead of villa, and it's a one-time thing. Like this doesn't accumulate every day. It's just a one-time benefit. But just the act of planning a pair of cottages instead of a single villa has given me an extra 20,000 in actions over the course of this season, right? So let's come back to this math up here. First of all, the supply difference alone obviously pays for a couple of expansions. The coin is pretty similar either direction, but remember the cottages are producing coin immediately on the upcoming collection. So essentially 11 villa again, but instead of having to wait for 20 hours to collect coin, I'm able to collect that coin the following collection. So same concept there. I have 11 villa, right, effectively, but I'm able to collect the coin off of that on the immediate collection. So I have 11 villa times the coin benefit of a villa is 440,000 additional coin that I've generated this season. Same concept as the additional actions. It's like this doesn't continue stockpiling every day. It's just a one-time benefit. I chose to plant cottages instead of villa, so I got the coin immediately. So I got an extra collection of coin out of my 11 villas, quote-unquote 11 villas. It's actually 22 cottages, but effectively it's 11 villas, right? Accidentally cleared my notes, but you guys get the idea. Extra 440 in coin throughout the season, extra 20k in actions throughout the season. Just a one-time benefit, plus the additional, it's 550,000 supplies cheaper to build a pair of cottages versus villas, considering the quantity that I had. So I've saved 550,000 supplies and 440,000 in coin, plus some extra actions as a benefit. These two quantities are more than enough to buy the expansions that you need to justify a house that's twice as big, essentially. This is a villa. It just takes up twice the footprint. But the cost of this villa option is substantially cheaper to the point where it's easy to buy these expansions. I feel like I'm beating the dead horse a little bit, but this concept is surprisingly difficult for some people to understand. The math is simple, though. You can break it down however you want, but the math is extremely simple. I still have 11 villas right now, effectively. I have 5 actual villas, 6 hybrid villas, if you will. So I currently have 11 villas. But if you have a city that has 11 actual villas, I would be very interested to see how many decorations you're able to fit into that. Because I'm assuming that if you have 11 villas, you probably didn't have a whole lot of resources to buy expansions. So fewer expansions means that your villa is a little bit cheaper on population. That's the one credit that I'll give it there. So it's a little more cost effective on population versus happiness drain. So on a smaller grid, you can get away with fewer arches. That is the advantage there. But it just doesn't counteract, like a third of an arch is not worth a 4x4 expansion. You know what I mean? So that's a wrap. Let's go over a couple more details, I guess. That's pretty much a wrap. I have a ballista camp planted, but I currently don't need the troops. I have it planted just in case I do start running low, but for right now it's not a huge need. A couple deaths, which is to be expected on difficulty 10. A couple injuries, no deaths. So it's not that I need to print them right now. I'd rather just save the resources. There you go. There's some extra supplies. So now I can justify deleting the farm. I don't need them necessarily, but I don't need the space either. If they're not dying, I don't need to plant decorations in that location. So it doesn't hurt me to just have the camp planted just in case. Next thing on the delete list is just farms. Continue filling with decorations and keep the action benefit of my 11 cottages, right? So that's a wrap. I hope this is helpful to you, and I hope that clarified some of the questions in the original comment section. So I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.